right? So remember, my mind works on energetic connections as opposed to intellectual connections. So that's why these beginning parts of classes, you can kind of feel they're related, but they don't always make sense how they're related. You notice that's part of my sharing style. Um, it's a line you've probably heard me talk about before. No ideas, but in things. You ever heard that line? It's by William Carlos Williams. And it kind of his, and this wouldn't even be a great example of it, but usually he has like he was a poet. He was a rural doctor in the early 20th century, walking around helping people stay alive in on rural farms, and wrote amazing poetry, right? Very direct, kind of one of the pioneers, and not quite just free verse, but his idea was no ideas but in things. And like, for example, one of the classic definitions of that is a very famous poem that some of you have maybe heard, real short. So much depends on the red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. Raise your hand if you've ever heard that poem before. It's a very famous poem. So much depends upon the red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. So if you think about that for a second, he's literally just seeing an image or a thing before his eyes as he's probably helping, who knows, let's imagine romantically he's delivering a baby or helping a sick kid, right? And he's walking by and he looks at the red wheelbarrow that's sitting on the family farm and just points out and uses the word so much depends, because around the turn of the century, the wheelbarrow was one of the mechanical beasts of burden on a family farm, which was at that point being the instrument that fed a lot of America. It was the main beast of burden before stuff, right? It's glazed with rainwater because without water, right, you don't have a whole bunch of stuff. And then that we also, there's chickens and there's the need to move soil and move things. So when you think about the simple lines, so much depends upon the red wheel, and by giving it color, he flashes your eye, right? Doesn't try to over describe it, doesn't try to give a whole bunch of adjectives, right? And he does the contrast between the white chicken and the red wheelbarrow. And he adds the earth's water, and he lights your mind, and he's just giving you things that he's walking by, as let's imagine he's going to help somebody. So much depends upon the red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. So my friend Pat Bellini, who's a poet, he and I would talk about William Carlos Williams right when I was starting to do asana. Right. And it made me realize that I was going to study asana. Instead of like, because I'm trained as a philosopher, right? I got all these freaking things in my head, all these abstractions. And one of my true norths has always been no ideas but in things. So you're always going to hear me, although I seem like I'm talking abstract. There's nothing more direct than our own experience, right? Instead of trying to make all big things and all the time, remember where. So to me, one very different permutation of no ideas but in things would be my own practice. So I've been telling you for a long time, you got to believe in your own practice. You got to develop your own practice, which is one of the big hurdles of being a yogi. It's okay if you're not practicing on your own. It's okay. But I'm telling you, you've heard a lot of teachers say it, not until you start practicing do you get nearly as much out of yoga as what yoga gives, right? So And that's just one of those things, right? And it's a big hurdle, right? So no ideas, but in things. So what does this have to do with David Byrne, right? More songs about buildings and food, right? Super direct, super literal, right? And all this is because I was thinking, to your chagrin or excitement, I want to do more stuff just on breathing, right? So kind of like no ideas, but in things like what's kind of more basic, right? And it's kind of like I study Austin, how awareness in life is going through the body, kind of like more songs about buildings, right? And I remember reading a thing um early on, early in my yoga, like in the first year, a thing, I think it's in Light on Yoga, but I don't know for sure. Um, that breathing is your most subtle energy exchange, right? It's an energy exchange. It's not, you're not taking something, you're exchanging, and it's an example of your symbiotic relationship with your environment. So is food, by the way, except can't go as long without oxygen as you can go without food, because you can store food. It's harder to store oxygen, right? And so the one thing that's interesting about pranayama and about breathing and about, why it would be a limb is that, well, there's a lot of interesting things about that, but it's the one mechanism, not the one, but an obvious one, where it's both involuntary and voluntary. You get to influence your breath. You actually can influence your digestion too. You can also punish your digestion, but clearly you can also punish your breath. And in fact, a whole bunch of people do that, right? And they smoke and they do all these things because by punishing your breath, you get a certain calming. Let's just talk about smoking for a while. I get it. In college, I smoked a little bit. I was never I'd go out and have like 3 or 4 cigarettes and be freaking sick for like 3 days, right? But at the time, it seemed important because there's something that happens. People go out and smoke to get calm, right? They do all sorts of things because it knocks their breath, creates a sensation out of an acceleration of an energy that isn't here, access to it, and it becomes a good thing, right? Same with food. I have trouble sometimes with, like, if I could figure out my fundamental relationship to food, I'd be just a better human being. More songs about buildings, my body, about food, where food is considered to include breathing. And it turns out that my breath is something my body will ensure I do for as long as it stays alive, right? It will keep trying to breathe, right? And I can actually interact with it. My mind can actually start to be part of its wave, but it's hard because once my mind starts to become too aware of it, my breath tends to falter, right? So like that interplay is something that yogis have gone, wait, this is more confusing than you think. This is harder to do than you think. And in fact, a whole bunch of things have to occur for the mind to seemingly enter with choice the energy exchange of breathing. No ideas, but in things. So like one of the things I like to say, right? Maybe the name of this class will be more songs about buildings and food, but no one will have any idea what that means, right? Right. So as I try to like understand, even though if I don't have all the techniques mastered, and I don't, again, as you know, my approach to pranayama into breathing is to keep it simple, stupid. To actually not try to be really fancy with a whole bunch of techniques, right? And try to manipulate my nervous system by doing different breaths. I actually think that I'll spend my lifetime trying to appreciate and deepen the quality of the exchange between me and the universe, trying to make my control, my mental awareness not screw up my fundamental interaction between me and the universe, right? That energy exchange. So one time I was teaching at the Yoga Journal conference, and one of the best things about having ever done that is I got to interact with a whole bunch of uh of really advanced yogis, right? Got to hang with them in teachers' lounges and all sorts of stuff and ask them questions. Gary Kratzow is quite a scholar of ancient texts. He's an unbelievable yoga therapist, right? And he's also, got a pretty big head for having so much knowledge that he has. So he's wonderful and kind of intense, right? And I was clearly really tired at one of the conferences I was at. I was worn out because that happens when you're traveling a lot and teaching and putting out and stuff. And he came up behind me and he said something from a distance saying, "Hey, you look kind of tired." And then later on, he came up behind me and whispered in my ear and said, "You need to do more pranayama," right? And I think it's because you can actually store energy. Apparently, people that have really deep physical pranayama practices don't need as much sleep. I don't know. It's just things I've been told, right? Um, and so so I also think there might be on the other end of that, as people get really older, like I'm watching my mom struggle more and more for breath, right? And she sleeps less too. So currently, you can actually not breathe well and not be able to get sleep. So, there's something going on there, right? All right. So, what I try to do rather than get so fancy about different techniques, because I don't really like thinking about my fundamental exchange with the universe. If I'm taking seriously kind of a non-violent, non-stealing approach with the thing that keeps me alive, right? The most acute thing that keeps me alive is my exchange with my energy exchange with the universe, right? I felt there's something like, oh, I don't want to just store up energy so I don't need sleep. It seems like I'm taking too much. And I have found if I focus too much on techniques in pranayama, my mind is not reached the point where it doesn't screw up my breath, right? So maybe I will eventually think really fancy techniques really matter. So all this to say, like I say other things to you, like if I say this when I'm talking to healthcare professionals a lot and trying to get them to realize the importance of their body and their body in the breathing process. I'll say, hey, if you take nothing away, and I say this in training, some of you that have trained with me know I say stuff like this. It's like maybe perhaps the most important exchange that you should pay more attention to is the intersection of your breath and your spine, right? So last week I was talking more about the relationship. I was talking about your bottom floating rib as a gatekeeper and how that opens energy to the underside of your collarbones and how you need a more bigger base below that. And I've been talking to you for years about your rib cage being more alive, trying to get you to realize that the subtlety of what's going on. And so just for a second to revisit last week for a second, ground a little bit, because hopefully you've got out of the last few classes that the sensation of grounding is particularly important if you're going to breathe with quality. So you're already in the world where you're making something that's involuntary, trying to come in your presence of your mind, trying to be there without interrupting it. So just notice your breath a couple times. Has anyone ever noticed that when you're talking a lot, you're stealing from your body? Yeah, yeah. And particularly, you're stealing from your legs. Isn't that wild? You know how I learned that and exploring that? I watched Geeta Iyengar propping her legs in a class when I was with her in 2002 in a great big group, 1,000 people. And she was propping her legs. And on like day 2 or day 3, everyone was setting up exactly how she was sitting and propping their legs with blankets and stuff. And she kind of crabbily said, "Why are you all doing that? Do you do that every day in your own practice?" And it's because we're trying to imitate, imitation as a form of flattery, I guess. And she goes, "Are you talking all day? I'm the one talking all day. I'm the one that needs support in my legs. You're not talking all day." And then she said, "Don't you know?" I think maybe I interpreted it this way, but in my mind, in my memory, I have, "Don't you know that talking steals from your legs?" So when I used to work with call center people, I'd want them to support their legs, right? Because you get tired. So again, reground into your legs right now. So I have a student, Sammy, very high level quadriplegic, that has trouble breathing a lot because she doesn't have an abdominal control. But I could really help her breath by supporting her legs. So she'd be sitting in a wheelchair and I'd be pushing on her knees, trying to help her breath, right? Because her diaphragm was floating in the air. So she was trying to inhale as if she was stepping off a curb, and the curb was 6 inches rather than 3, and she's in that floating place. So she was gripping the hell out of her diaphragm in order to start the inhalation, but you don't have to do that. So feel your legs for a second. Ground them a little bit, not with too much effort, and do it in a way that gives you that lighter feeling up through your spine. Not if you know what I'm talking about, right? Create that sensation of grounding to create lightness, because that's going to support your inhalation. That's going to be the backdrop of your inhalation. You want your spine more alert, but you don't want to use concentration in your spine that makes it rigid. You don't want to overdo it. You want alertness to come through your spine that's lighter, that comes from the sensation of grounding. So the last couple of weeks, I've also been saying, can you see and can you feel that your chest would want to be open a little bit? So if you were lying flat on the ground, we'd have a bolster underneath your spine or a blanket, because this energy of being collapsed is not as effortless as having your chest open. So now combine the grounding of your legs, the spaciousness that comes into your spine on the subtle body, right? And get your chest open and try to have them all the same energy. So it's ironic because I'm having to show your mind that they have to separate them in order to put them back together. But unless you separate them before you put them back together, you don't know the miracle of what's occurring. And your mind doesn't learn. Your mind then takes it for granted and steals. So by going back to no ideas but in things, I don't want to give you some glorious things about abstractions about breathing. I want you to recognize that if your body's grounded, your spine alert with spaciousness, your chest open with effortlessness through your whole body, those are experiences. from which I want you to breathe. So and then if you can easily breathe through your nose, can you see why you'd want your inside of your mouth soft and your, like, that would be part of the enhancement? Can you wake up some of your wanting to move again already? Can you wake up your body without the movement? Why would a lot of pranayama be taught without the movement? Explore, 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 explore. Keep your eyes wide shut, right? Good. And then release. So I'm curious. This is where I want to ask some questions, because remember, I'm the guy, I only want to do 10 or 15 minutes of actual pranayama practice, right? So as I is first of all, this idea of the base becoming the legs being part of that allows the diaphragm to be more seamless as it starts the inhalation, right? The effortlessness of your chest lifted. Are people following what I'm saying? See, what I see a lot of cameras turning off, and so makes me think that boredom's creeping in. Is it boredom? So someone speak, is it boredom, or are you being overwhelmed by all that's going on?
Edginess. Like it makes me want to invert. When I get edgy, I want to invert.
Because your mind's getting a little bit scared about what's underneath, right? I totally get that. So some of you are moving and rocking, right? Because it's being too much for your mind to actually, right? So if you need to, okay, let's do that for a second. But remember, it's that your mind is scared and now your body's soothing, right? Your mind is actually kind of like, oh no, oh no, you mean I have to be responsible for my own space that my mind occupies? That that what's happening is you're getting exposed a little bit. Okay, so you want to move because otherwise my mind gets bored and it doesn't stay alert, right? And I kind of and then when I get like that, then I get intimidated and edgy, all those things. And so as a yogi, you do need to take care of yourself, right? So Jessica, if you needed to go invert, but that's just one of the ways, that's one of your aspirins, right? It's a good aspirin, right? There's nothing wrong with that, right? And it's good that you know you need something. So try to do some things on your midline now, though, too. Remember, like, so I've been trying to build this for a while, right? Like, I hope that it's becoming to be the case that when you bring your hands together, if you can, or even your elbows on the table, that you get the grounding of the heel of the hands, right? And as soon as you start to bring your hands more together, I hope your chest starts to lift. I hope you've been remembering the sensations that I've been building for a couple of weeks now about finding your midline and finding the grounding. So now because I practiced this, and I don't know if you've been practicing this, as soon as I start doing this, I can start to feel an extension in my spine, right? As soon as I start doing this, I start to feel my legs more because I practiced the totality of what's happening. I know the overall sensations, not where my judging mind goes, but into the happening, right? There's a lot going on when I do this. No ideas, but in things. Now, some of you think that I'm guiding your imagination to believe all this is happening, right? Except, am I? Or is it actually happening? And my mind just like wants to not feel the totality of my experience. So how many of you think that pranayama was a little bit intimidating? Okay. So only one willing to raise their hand about that? Okay, so Bill, how so?
When you said the boredom was my fear of going deeper, I really recognized it as it being that because yeah. And especially after the weekend I had where it was all going out to go deeper it was actually kind of terrifying. And I would shut off and find myself fidgeting, doing something, and then have to come back again. And it was like, all right, I guess my exercise is just getting back, trying to get back, because I'm falling out of it every second. So yeah, it was a struggle actually. Um,
Yeah. So, but I want everyone, Bill having the courage to say it out loud, that normalizes it for everybody because on some degree, most everyone on the call is having that. And and it doesn't mean, maybe it's because you were out, but I'm telling you, there's a reason why pranayama can be intimidating because I don't want to say it's a confrontation because the only way you get through the confrontation is to quiet down your mind, right? But it's a no ideas but in things, right? You're right there and there's nowhere to go.
Yeah,
And so your mind finds
it's a relationship to the existence of this thing that has a boundary but doesn't have an end.
that's the potential of self. Like you're right at the point where you hear why this thing that everyone kind of has heard, but they don't think about the little s intersects with the big S. The individual self intersects with and by the way, yourself has a term self, not yourself, the self has unknown potential. That doesn't mean it has causal power. It's got a whole bunch of stuff. Pat, you raised your hand too about pranayama being intimidating. Got to unmute yourself.
Had a telephone call. Sorry. I was hoping that Bill would answer your question because the only thing that I would say is that, a lot of times I don't really understand what you're saying, but I
Yeah.
just kind of go with it. I just go with the flow. Okay. Just be with it and don't question it. And I don't have to force myself to understand that maybe my body will understand, even if my mind doesn't understand. And I don't like that. I like to understand things and I like things to be clear, simple, uncomplicated, so that I think I understand it, but I can't do that in this case.
Yeah, what's great though is that that's ex that's exactly like the thing about at the core of a pranayama practice, you don't get to understand.
Yeah, yeah.
It's an exchange, and that's why I say things like think about things I've been saying. You know, you have a secret between you and the universe, and no one gets to get in the way. But saying all these like weird, nice things, that's also a way of saying, guess what? You don't get to understand, right?
I'm
There,
trying, well, I'm trying to understand that. My mind doesn't like that because it's
I know.
always trying to understand. And I know that I can't understand. I've been doing this long enough to know that I'm not going to understand. So I'm trying to be with it. Not that I'm successful with that,
And
but
and that's part of why, if you think about the underlying thrust of what yogic realization is not that your mind ever comes to understand.
mhm.
It's that the
Yeah.
mind stops its need to understand.
Uh, I wouldn't say
Which,
I'm there yet.
oh, me either. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? This is like an ongoing work in
Yeah,
progress.
yeah.
But okay, so getting back to setting up for a pranayama class, right? And getting the sensations right? Because when the mind is brought into confrontation directly with itself, it's going to fidget. So, Bill, one thing I want to say is that trust your own fidget sometimes. It's doing exactly what it needs. Just start to notice its need to fidget without trying to judge it. I really believe in a good fidget. I
well,
try
well,
not.
I was noticing between when I had my eyes opened and closed because I could get there and stayed there when it closed. But I opened my eyes, and all of a sudden, the immenseness of impression overtook my relationship to the experience, and I would get thrown off. So I'm going back and forth, and I'm taking this trip, boom, 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 every time I open and close my eyes, and I'm going, this is fucking something here, you know?
Yeah,
And
exactly. And part of it is to smile and go, this is something here, isn't it? Like, and that's part of realizing there's no ideas but in things. Like the when you start to get the sense of this is effing something going on, that's a big part of it. And you get to participate in it. Instead of being overwhelmed with it, you know, you may not be participating in it perfectly, right? But you get, I spend a lot of my time trying to appreciate the immensity of what's happening without losing my center. Right. And the more I don't lose my center without having to grip my center, because my center is already happening, right? My body's already guaranteed a center. But if I can let the center be there, the immensity even gets bigger. But at a certain point, my mind has to stop judging. Right. Otherwise, I had this guru that I was around one time in some living room that I thought he was weird. It was way when I was first starting yoga, and he said this thing that I was really offended at the time, and now I kind of get it more after all these years, like 30 some years. And I still think he was being dramatic, but he said all thought is an expression of fear.
Fear?
Fear. Shit.
Yeah.
There's some truth to that. Right? The need to know to make the dark room lighter
Mm.
and turn a light on. But turning the thing is the way the understanding turns on a light is not the whole room. So you actually aren't understanding the darkness of what's in the room by turning on the light of understanding. That's one of the things about all these things are why we intuitively freak out about breath practice. Because you're left with like, what do I do here? And am I feeling this stuff? So let's go back to something simple. So now I've talked enough what we're going to do. So I err on the side of trying to get a level of appreciation for pranayama in a way that doesn't freak out my mind. I don't want to not appreciate. I don't want to like calm my mind down by denying the immensity of what's occurring and the beauty of it. And by the way, isn't it great that your mind actually, your body will make sure you keep breathing? So I'm stretching out. I'm doing a version of lengthening my spine right now. Like I don't have to fully be in charge of this. My body's going to keep me breathing. Even when my mind screws up, even when it wanders. So I'm lengthening my spine right now. You know why? Because I know I want the inhalation to actually hit the spaces in my spine, not just feeling the pressure on my ribs. So some of you are already moving around a little bit. Yeah, I want to try to wake these up a little bit, right? So I'm going to actually do my fingers, but it doesn't matter if you do, you take your arm over your head. I'm going to spread this space. You know why? Because this space is part of what's getting opened by shoulder stand, right? This space, this side armpit chest, is part of what's happening in the bandha, where my chest lifts and my chin drops. We're trying to get this space open. So I'm going to pretend I got overalls here for a second. And I'm going to try to get this space a little bit more open because I want to be a better receiver of what's happening here. I'm not a creator of what's happening here. I'm a receiver, right? I'm going to lengthen my spine again. Now for me, because I'm paralyzed and I don't feel my legs the way a lot of you do, right? Is I got to make sure my legs are here. Otherwise, the beginning of my inhalation, like Sammy, is going to grip my diaphragm too much, right? So I'm going to get my legs open a little bit. I'm going to spread them apart here for a second. Don't have to get them all loosened up, right? But I want to get a sense of freedom. My mind creates freedom by making the world smaller. It's very paradoxical, right? So this sense of freedom I can have, unless I move my body a little bit, my mind's kind of forgotten, right? Where all this space is, right? So I'm spreading my knees apart. And remember, we grew out of the earth, right? I hope you believe that. We weren't put here from air down to earth. We grew out of the earth, right? So I'm gonna push on my knees for a second and make sure my inhalation, where my mind thinks it starts when I start the inhalation, I want to get the sensation that it starts before my mind can see, right? That I may start the air at a certain point, but the energy is coming out of the earth. And I'm then taking something in, and at a certain point, something needs to ground that starts my inhalation. So I'm pushing on my knees a little bit. And then there's this very slight kind of, I hate to say it, lock, but there's a very slight gripping of the very low abdomen as the inhalation starts. So, but I'm wanting my mind not to believe that it starts with the grip. I'm wanting my mind to, by pushing on my knees, I'm creating a buzz and a relief to know that my inhalation has relief before I start the breathing. Or my mind thinks I start the breathing. So I'm grounding my legs. I'm having my spine start to already get lighter and extend. And then here comes my breath. So right now, I'm keeping this symmetry, right? By keeping the pressure on my knees a little bit. And I'm having my spine extend, and I'm trying to then fold in the actual exchange of breath, of the energy exchange of the oxygen into a container that's already prepared to receive. I don't know about you, but I overuse my diaphragm all the time. So I'm trying to be patient enough to let there be more underneath the beginning of my inhalation. And then I'm trying to equalize it between nostril, between lung. I'm adding things to it. And then on exhalation, I don't want to collapse like a sack of potatoes. I want to extend service back to the world on the exhalation, where my experience is a depletion. I want to have the depletion be the beginning of service. And then release for a second. So have you noticed, now this is subtlety stuff. And I've been going to acupuncture lately, and it's even tying into the meridian stuff. But I don't know, when I start to do this and get centered and start to feel the inhalation coming more up from the earth through my core, and then it picks up my breath, right? I actually can start to feel that my eyes breathe. Have anyone had the feeling that your eyes are breathing? Yeah. So Pat, you say, like, what does it mean for an eyes to breathe, right? But it's a sensation, or there's a little bit more so eyes breathing is a little bit too hyperbolic. It's more like you start to feel the connection all the way through to your eyes. In fact, in Uddiyana Bandha, it leads some yogis to raise their eye with their eyes closed. They raise their eyes up into their skull as part of the continuation. So I can kind of feel why that's the technique. But what you're trying to look for is the subtlety. So when I start to, we're gonna do a couple more breaths from the earth kind of coming up through. But when I start to watch it come all up, I feel it in my nostrils first. And then when that happens, I start to see, oh, there's a triangle here. Like I feel it come in each nostril and it actually comes up both hemispheres, right? Like what the hell? So that is what I meant by eyes breathe, right? So have, again, find your legs. Remember, we're not just trying to land on the earth, we're trying to be on the earth so it feeds the naturalness and the expansion of the inhalation skyward. Because remember, the air's out here, but you're trying to come up through the earth to have the exchange, right? So I'm going to ground again, soften my lips, teeth slightly, lips together, teeth slightly apart. I'm using, because I need it, I need a little bit of reference on my knees. So I can start the exhalation not with the movement of my lungs. Up through the nose. Try to equalize it and then try to feel it into my face. And then as you exhale and the shoulder blades drop, the spine extends, right? Try to let that happen rather than make it happen. Now remember last week's class. Notice the bottom floating ring. The gatekeeper. Try to get the inhalation to nudge it like a horse nudging its nose right into you. Try to then feel an expansion of the collarbones. And then let it exhale out. Good, and then release. So this might be a time to move a little bit because maybe all of a sudden your mind got lost. Kind of like didn't know where it was. Eventually, you won't want to move like this in a really focused pranayama class. You'll want to just go with the, dance with the person that brought you, right? Like whatever got you there, but that takes time. So move back and forth as you need because we're going to do a few more. So last week, now, so I know, maybe a couple of you like the Viloma one where you're inhaling and pausing, right? On the inhalation. And that's cool. So like, I know a lot of people think, oh, I'm doing more. If I'm doing techniques, then there's something for my mind to do, as opposed to be in the confrontation of the immensity of what's happening, right? So on this one, we're going to try Viloma 2. We're going to go back and have a couple of breaths. And then on Viloma 2, you don't break up your inhalation, but you break up your exhalation into 3 parts. I like 3. Some people do 4. 4 seems too many to me. My mind has to impose the 4. The 3 seems more natural to me. So get ready, get all even, right? Remember, we're trying to relieve the diaphragm from thinking it's the initiator, right? So that's why you're feeling your legs, and you're doing some things to get your spine ready to already be expanded and lighter, right? So when you do, so you're just doing that before. So I have to go through things again because I'm talking, it's hard, but you got to soften the inside of your mouth and let your eyes sink and do all the things that help you not be distracted with all the light outside, right? And then from the earth, beginning before your mind does, then start the inhalation. Try to equalize it through each lung, through each nostril. Feel each eye, feel it, your forehead on each side. And then let it wash out without you collapsing. And then take a normal breath, a recovery breath. And then on this next inhalation, pause at the top, and then on the exhale, exhale until it's 1/3 of the way down, and then pause, 2/3 of the way down, pause, and then on the final part, exhale and letting go all the way down right to your lower abdomen. So now you've heard it in words. Now try it again. Inhale, make sure the lightness is already in the spine and the alertness is already in the spine. Put the breath in service, the air in service of what's already happening. Pause slightly at the top. Exhale 1/3. Exhale the second third. Exhale the bottom third. Try it again. Inhale. And then do the 3-part exhale. Try to notice if your mouth got tight, if your jaw started to clench. Take a recovery breath. And then try it again. Then a couple recovery breaths. And then Shavasana, let your chair hold you up. Now, what I have a hard time, it's important when you're letting Shavasana is to not focus on your breath, but the first couple of breaths, or the first minute after I've done such focused breathing, I just hear the echoes of what I just practiced. So you can't just suddenly not be aware of your breath as much. But now rejoin the bigger river, right? Trust your body to breathe. Trust the hum of submission. Feel your breath. Don't change it. Thank your body. It already knows how to breathe. It will keep you breathing. Start to bring yourself back. Slightly deeper inhalation. Slightly longer exhalation. So I'm finding myself wanting to rock a little bit as I'm coming back out of this, right? To move around a little bit, to remember where the living part is, right? And then when you're ready, open your eyes. So one of the things that I've come to, and it's really hard, so it's right in the thing that you and I both struggle with, which is when I kind of get into the vastness of what's happening, instead of it being intimidating, I challenge you or want you to try to invert that, not just Pat. It's actually freeing. So that gets back to Bill, like when your mind starts to wander again, like when mine does, trust it, right? That the vastness actually allows for and affords the fact that your mind can't sit with it, right? That it's exactly the other way. Instead of being intimidated by it, I'm like tickled by it, right? Because it's like, wait, it's gonna let me try again tomorrow, right? Like it's not judging me.
And the answer keeps changing and evolving. So it's a beautiful chase.
Yeah. And then it's actually like, I imagine
Discovery.
more to be like, it's allowing the wave to pick up the surfboard, not, not trying to chase the wave. Right. And it's like, oh, but the mind has a hard time seeing it that way. Right. But the vastness, getting back to the back to the beginning, the vastness of the experience underneath the judging mind, that's the truth. That's the no ideas but in things. When you start tuning into your experience, it's actually vast, right? And so then you take pranayama and asana, and I think buildings and food, right? That by singing about buildings and food, David Byrne's singing about everything. So as I sit there and study and try to practice yoga and things like asana and breathing, I'm staying and believing in your own practice and letting it be, letting you have today I'm sure made a whole bunch of people have emotions. I saw a couple of that. I saw people having like get uncomfortable. Yeah, exactly. And by the way, that is not a failure. That's why you get company and you do it together. So you don't feel like, oh my God, I suck. And this is probably easy for everybody. Or the other thing, oh my God, will he just stop talking? Right? So if you have that, start practicing more on your own. That's all I want. If you want to use me as my God, if you just stop talking, then I'd practice more. Good. Practice more. Right? And then we can compare more notes. Right? Okay, what did you. And then we can hear these lines like talking steals from your legs. What the hell? I totally get it. They're not the only thing. So when we teach healthcare professionals, when they're having to document all their encounters and they're at the end of their day and they're pissed off, we'd ask them to put sandbags on their legs, right? If they're talking on the phone all day, we'd ask them to ground their legs. Because I know this other truth, that if they ground their legs more through the day, their breathing is going to get better and they're actually going to be less dissipated by the end of the day. And they're going to be maybe more willing to take a walk at the end of their day rather than hide from whatever they have to hide from because they're tired. All these things. They're subtle truths, right? And I can't stick with them in every moment, just so you know. I can only see this shit in glimpses. And that's enough. That's enough. It's going to keep me busy the rest of my life. All right. All right, everybody. Hands together. Namaste.
Almost.
Spirit in me bows the spirit